Today I would like to share with you one of my favorite folk tales, The Boy Who Drew Cats. This tale originates from Japan and was initially translated into English in 1898. I became familiar with this tale at a young age when my mother signed out a video from the library, and while initially I was quite scared of the ending, on reflection I realized that I also really enjoyed it. And it also seems as though it's not actually that widely known here, so hopefully I can rectify that to a certain degree by sharing it with you today. So without further ado, here is The Boy Who Drew Cats. Long ago in the country of Japan, there was a terrible drought. Rain hadn't fallen in the country for many years, the ground was dry and cracked, and food was very scarce. At this time, a young boy lived on a farm with his mother and his 4 older brothers. They all worked very hard on the farm, but the young boy was small and frail, and unfortunately he couldn't work for as long as the rest of his family. His mother would say to him, "Never you mind, little one, why don't you go and draw us some beautiful pictures instead?" And because the boy loved to draw, he would put ink to paper and he would draw beautiful pictures of cats and birds and landscapes. And his brothers would say to him, "Why don't you instead draw us some food?" And so the boy would draw them a glorious feast, and it would almost seem as if there was enough food to go around. Now the mother feared for her youngest son because she knew that working hard on a farm was no way for him to grow up strong. So with a heavy heart, she packed up all his belongings in a cloth and she took him to the nearby temple. They were met at the temple gates by an old priest with a hunched back and a long white beard and a friendly twinkle in his eye. The mother asked the priest to take the boy on as an acolyte. The priest said to the boy, "Do you wish to become a priest?" The young boy said, "I wish to not be a burden." The priest wasn't impressed by this answer, but he interviewed the boy more thoroughly, and he was delighted by some of the creative answers he gave to some other questions, so he agreed to try the boy out as an acolyte. He led the boy into his temple while the mother waved goodbye from the gates. Unfortunately, the boy struggled at his duties as an acolyte. When he was asked to transcribe an old scroll, he instead turned the characters into pictures with wings and whiskers, and soon the scroll was filled with a wonderful drawing instead of the words he was supposed to be copying. When he was asked to sweep the courtyard, his mind would wander completely and he would have to copy his daydreams down on paper. To stay in the priest's good graces, he started drawing him pictures of cats because he had noticed that those were the pictures the priest enjoyed the most. One day, while he was sweeping the dead leaves out of the courtyard, inspiration struck him for a gift that he could give to the priest. He went and found paper and ink, and he started to draw a beautiful Siamese cat frolicking among the leaves. Soon he gave that cat a dance partner, and soon there was an entire troop of dancing cats on the page that had taken him most of the afternoon to draw. The priest went looking for the boy, and when he saw that there were still piles of dead leaves in the courtyard, he realized that this was not the place for the boy. And he said to the boy, "I think it's time for you to go back to your family's farm." The young boy was saddened by this, but as the priest was seeing him off, he gave him a gift wrapped in the cloth that his mom had sent with him. And the boy opened gently the cloth and found a beautiful box containing the most wonderful set of brushes and inks that he had ever seen. And the priest said to him, "I think that you were not meant to be a priest. I think that you were meant to be a great artist." The boy was too emotional to respond to this, so the priest left him with one final piece of advice. "Avoid the large places at night. Stick to the small." The boy didn't understand what this meant, but he was still too emotional to ask, so he repeated it over and over in his head, puzzling at the meaning, while he walked away. Avoid large places at night. Stick to small. The boy was too ashamed to go back to his family's farm, and he still desired to not be a burden. So instead, he decided to find another temple where he could try again at being an acolyte. He soon came on another village, but the villagers in this place were very strange. He had seen overlooking the village a wealthy and luxurious temple, and he wished to try his luck there, but when he asked the villagers about it, they ignored his questions and hurried off, or instead, when he asked the direction, would only gesture violently and scurry off. What the boy didn't realize is that this temple had been taken over by an evil goblin rat, and the village and the temple were under his thrall, and nobody had been able to come and go in that temple for several years. The boy climbed the steep stairs up to this abandoned temple, and when he got there, he saw a drawing on the temple gates of the goblin rat, and inscribed faintly next to it were the words, "Avoid large places at night, stick to," and then it trailed off because the person who was leaving the message had not been able to finish. The boy was frightened, but he didn't know what to do because it was becoming dark and the steps up to the temple were quite precarious, so he was afraid to go down them again in the dark. So instead, he walked into the temple and started to look for signs of life to see if anybody was still there. As he was looking in the rooms, he heard a scratching sound behind him, and becoming frightened, he dove into a room suddenly and closed the door behind him. In this room, there were many screens of blank white sheets of paper, waiting for the priests to sit next to them in prayer. This comforted the boy, and he thought maybe if he waited here long enough, somebody would return and he could ask to be an acolyte at that temple. He also thought that while he waited, maybe he would decorate the screens to impress the priests when they returned. So he took out his brush and his ink set that he had received from the old priest at his previous temple. And what he produced was truly magnificent. He drew wonderful cats, beautiful cats with broad shoulders and sharp teeth and claws and glorious whiskers all over the screens, hundreds of cats. But just as the darkness began to consume the rest of the light in the room, he remembered the old priest's words, "Avoid large places at night, stick to small." And with that, the boy looked for a place to hide, and he found a very cramped cupboard, and he crammed himself into the cupboard and shut the door and hid there. And just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard a terrible scratching noise, and then all of a sudden he heard the howling of many cats, and he heard a great battle and the clash of claws on swords, and he was very frightened, and a corner was violently knocked off of the cupboard, but he did not move. He stayed hidden. He stayed awake all night, and at dawn the sounds were gone. And so he emerged from the cupboard to find the screens were all shredded and all the cats that he had drawn were gone. But he walked out of the temple, and on the large wall outside of the temple there sat the most glorious cat he had ever seen. It was the King of Cats. And in front of the King of Cats on the ground was the horrible tail of the goblin rat who had exerted his power over the town. And the boy realized that the smell of decay he had smelled in the temple was gone, and that a breeze was stirring, and that the rain was beginning to fall for the first time in years. And at that, villagers from the village below ran up to the temple, and he said to them, he showed them the tail, and they said, "We know the goblin rat has been vanquished. thank you so much. And they saw the wonderful drawing of the King of Cats, and they recognized the boy's talent as an artist, and they let him stay at the temple as an artist when all the priests came back, and he became one of the most famous artists in all of Japan, and his story was known far and wide as the vanquisher of the goblin rat. And that is the end of my story. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so at the end I started to get a little scratchier. But this story has been a very inspiring one to me, in my opinion. It does have some different endings, but the ending that I prefer is the one where the boy remains at the temple as an artist and becomes an artist rather than being welcomed by the rest of the priests as a fellow priest. So hopefully you are all satisfied with that ending and with that telling, and I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about this in the comments. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having this class with you. Take care.